why do we dip and say good and sweet? And it's pretty simple. Most of the scholars sort of put forward. Good for Goodyear is about having a spiritual and lofty and very high-end kind of, you think good things and you do good things. The sweetness of the year is the tangible side of things. And what we're going to do today is look at the very, very tangible side, which are the 50,000 or so, or maybe more bees that are sitting inside these boxes standing next to me. So a couple of other thoughts before we get going. A lot of questions I get from members of the community are how come honey is kosher? Bees in themselves are not a kosher animal, yet honey is kosher. Why is that? And from what I understand, honey is the only product that is produced by animals where they're processing it for us, as opposed to creating it for some other reason for themselves. So the bees are processing the honey, they're not internalizing and ingesting it. So when a cow makes milk, the cow eats the grass and turns the grass into milk by digesting it and another organ making the milk. Whereas the bees process the honey by gathering the nectar and then drying it, adding an enzyme to it, storing it, and then we take it. So this is why honey is kosher, unlike certain other products from non-kosher animals. So going back to the sort of New Year aspect, and I know you really probably want to see inside him more than listen to me talk. I just want to explore a little bit for a minute, though, the sweet versus the sting kind of aspect. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that, you know, honeybees are like people. And I think this is a beekeeper a lot. The bees live in a community, just like we live in a community. They have roles and social functions. I doubt we're going to be able to see that today, but we might see some of those behaviors today. They communicate just like we do. And they represent two major extremes in the world, just like as we enter Elul, when we start thinking about Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of penitence and Yom Kippur, two very extreme things. On the one hand, we have kindness from ourselves, kindness through acts of teshuvah, tzedakah, so on and so forth, but also acts of severity, where God can admit, you know, we're trying to avoid this severe decree. And bees do that too. They're very kind in that they produce this lovely honey for us, but then when you get stung as much as I do, it can be severely painful, and they represent that severity. You know, they do a good job for pollination, but they also protect themselves, and they protect in an interesting way. Now, it would be wrong of me to position honey as only a product that we enjoy as Jews at Rosh Hashanah, because we should also be enjoying honey at Shavuos. But at Shavuos, we add it to milk-based products as well, if we're traditional. So, one other thought, and then I'll introduce you more to the world of beekeeping and my little thought of the day, as it were. Rabbi Yosef ben Moshe says, when you think about God's judgment of us as people, and you think about Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur and the 10 days of penitence, we temper the bitterness of the year with the sweetness of the honey. One of the reasons to do that is for ourselves, so that we can focus on the season and on the things that we need to do. The other is so that we don't really understand God's ways, they're mysterious, but if God is experiencing something, if we're made in the incarnation of God, and God is experiencing something through us as much as we experience through them, then the little sweetness that we get from the honey at Rosh Hashanah hopefully will be carried through in God's judgment, and move forward in that kind of way. So I'll shut up on the religious side of things and introduce you more to the world of beekeeping now. I'm going to spend about, 20 minutes probably talking and opening up the beehive and introducing the different pieces of equipment that we use as beekeepers, and talking about different stuff. So the chat room the chat function should be open. Ruth and Iris and Sadie, for those of you who know us as a family, are sitting in the garden here with me with a laptop, and they'll be sharing some of the questions that you have. We're obviously outside, and it's a little noisier than some places, so hopefully everyone can hear me okay and all of that. So a couple of things super important as a beekeeper. Number one is that we use a series of tools. The first tool that we use a lot is called a hive tool. It looks something like this. It has a sharp edge, as you will see, that we will use to pry open the hive and to scrape things and so on and so forth. And this one's called a J hook, partly because I'm Jewish and partly because it looks like the letter J, so that we can lever out frames from this kind of hive. This kind of hive is called a Langstroth Hive, and it's one of 3 different kinds of hives, or 4 different kinds of hives that are commonly used. There's the Ware hive, which allows the bees to be a little more wild. There's a thing called a top bar hive, which looks like a trough. And then there's the skep hive. And the skep is a basket that looks a little bit like you might see in a Winnie the Pooh illustration or a children's book. The problem with the skep hive is, in order to do what we're about to do now, you have to throw the whole thing in the river and kill all of the bees so that you can cut open the basket and access the honey. So this is our hive tool, which enables us to get inside. Before we go inside, though, we're going to use this, which is a smoker. I'm going to put some combustible material in here, and we're going to make smoke. The reason that we make smoke is that the bees are highly intelligent, community-based animals. So what that means is they have to talk to each other. They have to communicate. And they do this for a variety of reasons. One is to tell each other where the food sources are. Another is to maintain colony health. The bees, the worker bees, if you think about them, are the most important people in the hive. They dictate whether the queen survives or is replaced, whether she's kicked out or whether to swarm. They hold the intelligence. And the way that they communicate is through pheromones, which are chemicals, and a dance. They do 2 kinds of dance, the wiggle and the waggle. When I'm teaching little kids, I usually do a little bit of wiggling and waggling to just sort of show how they move around. Now, hopefully, when we open up the frames, we might be able to see some of those behaviors. I can see some of the behaviors where they're flying in different patterns out here, telling each other where to go, but it will not work with this camera to share that with everybody today. But when I smoke, going back to the smoke, when I put smoke into the beehive, they suddenly panic and they go, hold on a minute, there's a fire nearby. I need to protect the most important thing in the hive. And if we were having an interactive session, I would ask you a question as to what that is. Most people raise their hand and say the queen bee, but actually it's not, it's the honey. The bees can make another queen bee really within a couple of weeks, but they can't replace all of the honey in a hurry. So when I introduce smoke into the equation, they gorge themselves on honey, and they suddenly become super full, and then they can't communicate properly, and they get lethargic, and then they're less likely to sting me. Some beekeepers will wear a lot of protective equipment. I generally tend to try not to, but some people will wear a veil. I'll only wear this really when I'm extracting honey, when I'm taking the honey out of the hive and stealing from them, because that's when they get very angry. And it's often a good idea to wear thick gloves at the same time as well. You do get stung. You'll be amazed how much they can sting you through materials, but they don't. One tries to protect oneself sometimes. And then the other piece of equipment that you need for beekeeping is a horsehair brush. This one is now covered in honey from many years of use, but it's a soft brush. If I need to move the bees, I want to brush them away. Now, things that we're going to look for when we go into the beehive. I have a couple of questions. Okay, I'll pause for a second. Question number 1. Yeah, okay. So the question is that a solar panel on this hive? And the answer is yes, it is. And when I take this off, you'll see why. Inside of this box is a small fan. These are European honeybees, as all honeybees are. And it gets pretty hot here, and they're used to being in hot weather. But this just helps to draw air through the hive and keep them cool. So they don't have to do what's called fanning as much, which is when they come and sit outside by the door and beat their wings to get the moisture out. Now, the reason that there's so much moisture in there is they're working on turning nectar into honey, and the moisture content of nectar is higher than honey, so they need to dry it out. And they dry it out to about 17% water moisture, and then they cap it, and we'll see some capped honey. And capped honey has been pulled from ancient Egypt, from the pyramids, and is still edible today, several thousand years later. So if we really want to taste something that our forebears have passed over time, probably took when they were slaves in Egypt, this is probably the only food that's still available where we could have a shared culinary experience. Any other questions?
I have a bunch of videos. I think you'll get
them. Okay. So just so we know, at the end, I'll talk about some of the differences between wasps and bees, which is something that confuses a lot of people. But so bees live in a colony. We call this a colony. Each hive is a colony, has one queen, a lot of worker bees who are all women, and male bees who are called drones. The male bees reproduce with queens from other colonies out there in the ether. It's actually something that nobody knows where it actually happens. But anyway, that's a by the by. So inside of what we're going to see is honeycomb. Now this is empty honeycomb. It's made of beeswax. The young bees are very good at making the beeswax. Their glands kind of overperform on beeswax. So we're looking as beekeepers at hive health. We're looking at wax production because that shows us how many young bees there are and how busy they are and so on and so forth. This honeycomb is then used multiple ways. They use it to store food in it with capped honey. They use it to lay babies in there and as a nursery, and they use it for pollen storage as well. So it's multifaceted. When it's brand new, it's a very pale whitish color, and then it goes brown over time like this. Not because it ages or anything, but because the bees have used it. And if you think about it, the bees fly out into the world. They don't take a bath before they come home. They come home with dirty feet, and they basically make the wax dirty. Okay, so that's introducing you to the basic elements of the tool. I'm now going to open up my smoker here and make some fire. For those children who are watching, please don't try this at home without adult supervision. I'm taking some combustible material here, and I put it into my smoker. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yep. Okay, that's a great question. So I'm just going to make smoke here from this fiery stuff. Okay, so in reverse order, from what I understand, I don't know the answer to whether royal jelly is a kosher product or not, to be absolutely honest. The pollen is just pollen that they've collected from plants. It's a plant-based food, and from what I understand, is kosher. Nothing is done to it. It's not treated. So it's just like if we were to go out into the fields and collect that pollen, it can be eaten. I'm just making smoke here while I'm doing this. But just as a warning, don't eat too much pollen because it can give you a tummy ache. Now, when we take pollen from the beehive, we have to be careful because the bees need the pollen to feed the young. And as much as we might like it as grown-ups, we take away too much pollen, then we inhibit their ability to make babies, to feed those babies. And if they don't have the food, then they won't make them. So now I'm like a steam train. Sorry, Ruthie, could you repeat another question?
Okay, what is the bee?
Sure. So the queen bee is after she's born, she goes out and she mates, and then a couple of weeks later, she comes back. Moments later, she comes back to the hive, and then after a couple of weeks, she's fertilized and starts laying eggs and spends her entire life laying eggs. She can lay what are called haploid and diploid eggs, so they're genetic copies either directly of herself or they're fertilized eggs. And she will lay mainly workers in the spring, and then some drones to the boy bees, and then more workers again. And the colony works together with different jobs and different functions. So as I mentioned earlier, the young bees in particular, sorry, smoking myself there when we talk while I'm doing this. The young bees often work the jobs inside of the hive, so they will tend to the young. They'll be nurse bees. They'll gather food and bring food around the hive for the nurse bees who look after the young. There's an undertaker bee who works to take dead bees out and get rid of them. And when we may get lucky and see some of that behavior today because the bees are starting to change their profile for the winter, but we'll witness bees flying out, dead bees, and dropping them in the garden. There's guard bees who sometimes actually even just standing here will just fly out and sting me or sting whoever's there, thinking that we're predators. So there's a whole bunch of functions there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, any other questions? Oh, in the winter. So what do we do? Great question. So why do bees make so much honey in the first place is the question. They make so much honey so they have food for times when there's no pollen and no nectar available, i.e. the winter. So what do is we take some of that honey away. We're inhibiting their potential for survival. So we feed them sugar water. We treat them for mites and other insects that may be causing them problems. So there's a particular problem with what's called a varroa mite. It's a type of mite that causes mental illness and wing deformation, a stunted wing syndrome in the hive. So we treat for that, which helps to strengthen the colony for the winter. We put an insulated jacket around the beehives so they're just insulated and stay warm. And we'll feed them sugar water as well if needed, or at various times. Any other questions, or shall I? Okay, so I'm going to just take a little bit of smoke, and I'm going to smoke, in this case, around the doors. I'm going to hold the camera. Yeah. One second.
Yeah, I'll just hold it. Yeah.
Let's turn it around now. Okay, so here I have my smoker. I'm going to just do a little smoke just to let them know that I'm coming. And you see they all start to stop. And now I don't want to do too much smoke because it's not too hot, but it's warmer. I don't want to hurt them. And I also don't want to poison them. So we keep a weight on the roof of the hive. Take that off. We take the lid off. There's some spiders living up there today. And then another weight. And so there was a couple of questions about the solar panel, and inside here is some insulation for the winter, and then there's the fan. But the bees themselves sometimes don't like the fan, so they seal it up with what's called propolis, which is like glue. It's a bit like beeswax meets glue. So there's the fan. You can see some bees. Now, I don't know if you can get close, Ruthie, but if you can see the bees, we're looking at bee health here. What's going on? So are they hairy? Yes, they are. And are their wings well-formed and shiny? And yes, they are. So these bees are looking really healthy and really good. Now, we last opened this beehive up about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. And there's a lot of honey in here. And by a lot, I mean in this box here is about 30 pounds of honey, just in this gray box. In this white box is about between 60 and 70 pounds. I'm going to have to lift those off, and it's heavy. So you can watch me pull my back out. Okay. So I'm just going to, using my Hive Tool here, like I said, as a lever, open up. I'm going to take this box off. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, so the bees, that's a great question. So when you go to the supermarket and you buy like one type of honey that's come from one kind of pollen, what that means is it's industrially produced honey where people who own boxes like this will rent them out to farmers in an orange grove or an avocado orchard or an almond orchard. And then basically the bees will just fly around that orchard and only take pollen from that area, and then that's harvested and sold out. These bees go up to 5 miles from here and eat what's available. So, yeah. What do I do with all the honey? So I'm part of a business, the Hive Supply Company. We have about 250 hives around Chicago, and we sell honey. So some of our honey is used to make alcoholic beverages, like Revolution Brewing or Ripe Bee cider, where we've done a honey-finished beer and a honey-finished cider, or at places like CH Distillery, where they combine honey into cocktails and onto cheese plates and other kind of culinary uses. And then we sell honey in jars, local honey. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you what it's like inside. So I'm going to put this on the ground. I would normally do this up there, but because this beehive's got big and tall, it's going to be easier to do it on the ground here. So I'm just going to loosen off the propolis using my J hook, lever up the frame, and we're going to look and see. Now this should be capped honey, and yes, there it is. So some interesting things going on here. So our bees are all drinking honey. They're using their tongue. Because of the smoke, they're obsessed with getting honey. Their tongue is like a straw, so they stick it in there and they suck it out. It's the same way they suck out nectar from a plant. Under my smoke hole. This is capped honey. And then here is nectar that they've turned into honey and they're still drying. So it's not been capped yet. It's not finished. This is a short frame, and this in itself weighs about 4 pounds. It's on both sides, covered in honey. So this is where honey, everyone can see okay? Now, this is a really good frame in that it's neat and tidy, and the bees have done a great job, and they've done it just as they should. This is like textbook. So I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to show you that the one next door, the next frame along, and in the same beehive. One second, I'll get to the question. They haven't built it out in quite the same way. Sometimes we put a piece of plastic or beeswax in the middle of here to help them to start off making their honeycomb. But this is new wax. Remember how I was saying it's yellow? That they've added on to some old wax. And there's some capped honey and some honey being made and nectar. So this is a great frame, not ready for production. If we were to try and remove this honey that's still being made that has a higher moisture content, when I put the honey in a jar, it'll start to ferment because the moisture level is too high. Which is nice if you want to make alcoholic beverages, but not if you want to have non-fizzy honey on your toast. So, yeah, Sadie. Yep. What? So when I harvest the honey, I'll show you in a minute. Question is, how do we get the bees off? So we use smoke. We shake them, which I'm not going to do right now because I'll get a little angry. And we use the bee brush. So remember,
Brush them off.
Here's the brush. We would literally just brush them off the frame, like I'm brushing my arm.
Can you see us now?
We sell our honey at some markets and at thehivesupply.com. I'm just smoking a little bit more and direct. I'm sure you can all hear me because I'm called in through the audio, but the video might not be working. 1 second. I'll bring a Zoom technical issue. Sorry, say there's an aeroplane going by. What's that again? I couldn't hear you. Yeah, that's a great question. How do they navigate back to the hive from so far away? So the bees, so some people think bees have some magical radar or some homing device where they can come back, but that's not true. We know from research, from scientific research, and in fact, I've spoken to some of the researchers myself down at U of I in Champaign, where there's a bee lab. They navigate by geographical feature and by where they are in relation to the sun. So when they're flying out, as I say, they're too small for us to show this on camera, but we can see them flying out here. They'll fly out in a pattern, and they basically go one side or the other of a circle, and depending on where and how they do that, they're communicating to each other where to go for water or good sources of pollen or something else. They're habitual creatures, so if I move this beehive, they don't know I've moved it. The bees will all come back to be here. So once we've established a beehive in a place like this, we don't move it because they know where this tree is that's next to them. They don't know that this is a garage, but they understand it's an object, and where the tree is along there and so on and so forth. That's how they navigate. That's how they work out where they're going. They will go back to the same place over and over again. So once they found a good source of water, for example, they will keep going back to that source of water. Okay, this box is very heavy, so I'm just going to lift it off a second. It's like about 70, maybe 80 pounds of honey there. Yeah.
Even if you were small beekeepers who control the type of food you get, is it how to make
if you lived in the countryside and there was a monoculture situation, then yes. But here in Chicago, it's impossible because they get a lot of food from trees, from the linden tree and the locust tree, and I can't tell them which trees to go to and which not to go to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the beehive and I'm going to look to see if I can find some nursery frames and see if we can see evidence of our queen laying. These top boxes are often used for honey. So this is old comb, so it's very dark, but it's a box that's newer that we've put onto the beehive. So you can see glistening, some of the cells are starting to be filled up with nectar, and they're making honey. I don't know if it comes through on the screen or not, but what I'm trying to show you is this is how it starts. They bring back the nectar and they start making the honey, and it ends up being what we just looked at in terms of capped honey. As I get down into this beehive more, they're going to get a little more angry and agitated. So. Yeah. Say another question? Oh. Thehivesupply.com is our website, and maybe Amy can send out a little email later, or that's thehivesupply.com. We're a business based in North Lawndale. We're trying to create jobs and economic opportunities in North Lawndale. It's a tougher part of town. Trying to introduce concepts of urban agriculture and beekeeping, and maybe create some excitement in some of the youth down there in terms of thinking about careers in urban agriculture and entomology and so on and so forth. So. Yeah. I have done a little bit. We have a friend who's a beekeeper in Colorado who I've talked to a few times. I have been to visit beehives in other countries when I've been there and had the opportunity. Okay, so this is another example of kind of from a beekeeping point of view, the beekeeper, how strange is this? On the one side, they've built comb and they've started to cap off some of the honey. They're working on the honey and processing it. Then on the other side of the frame, they've done absolutely nothing. So in this situation, I have to think, how do I encourage them to build on this side? Now, at this time of year, they probably won't, because they're now starting to think about winter. As Reese said, they're starting to get a little more irritated, because we don't normally open the hive for this long. So I'm going to use maybe a little more smoke than I would normally. The other reason why this particular frame doesn't have anything here, I mean, I know the answer, is it's slightly abnormal in that this beehive has several doors. One of them is right here, and this is their main entrance and exit way into that box. There's another one down here, and then this is actually just sort of worn and rotted a little, so they use this as an unofficial door. I'm going to take this box off. Yes.
Oh, I think that might have been a while ago. Is the video now? Hey, Amy, is the video now? Can you see? Thumbs up?
Okay, so they're beginning to get a little excited. So I might move to a different beehive to try and find the nursery. So we're going to put this one back together, and we're going to open up a different one to have a look, because I'm going to get stung to bits otherwise, which will be very amusing for all of you folks and not so amusing for me.
Sorry. The feed's a little dumpy because I keep getting seeds on my leg.
Okay. Any other questions while I put this? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to move over to a different beehive. You can disconnect the power cord. And I'm going to see if I can find evidence of babies. We're not going into the nursery area on that hive because, as you could maybe hear, they're starting to get very excited. I'm going to make a bit more smoke here. Any other questions, Sadie? So personally, I have 3 hives here and then 5 of the community garden. And then as a hive supply company, we have 250 hives around Chicago. So we're one of the largest beekeepers in the area, if not the largest in Chicago. And yeah, it's fun. Yep.
Is there anything
Into jars? Yeah, no, so that's a great question. So we take the frames that you saw there with capped honey, and we brush off all the bees, and then we take it to a food safe area, and we have a centrifuge, so we spin those frames. So before we do that, we scrape off the cappings, and then we spin it, and the honey comes out, and then all we do is filter it. So we serve raw honey. And actually the raw bit is very interesting from a halakhic Jewish point of view, because the word raw, I believe in Hebrew, is chai, just like life. And so some people say that we should eat raw honey at Rosh Hashanah because of the life, because of the chai part. Yeah. Yes, each hive is its own colony and has its own queen, one queen, and everything else going on. Great question. Maybe. So for a few years, the bees would probably, if they survived as a colony, keep coming back there.
Ever complain about the or do you pay them?
No, I don't pay them in honey. Most people in today's landscape feel that the honeybees are a valuable part of our world and need to be protected, and are very, very positive. One person once complained a couple of times, and then we had a chat about it, and everything's been fine. Sorry, there are bees on the roof of City Hall, and they're managed by a different organization. We manage hives on the roofs of other places downtown, but not City Hall. But I do know the folks that do those. So I'm basically doing the same thing as we did over there and inspecting the hive. And I'm going to pull out a frame here. This hive is not as well developed as that one, but what you're going to see here is a very different, same pattern, but very different things going on. So you can see these areas here that are brown that look, you know, you could say, oh, that maybe they're full of honey. No, those are full of brood. Those are full of eggs that have turned into larvae that have turned into pupa. Is that the right way around? Or the other way around? I can't remember now. I'm getting hot. I should have. Anyway, so basically, once the egg has been fed and has gone through this first two phases of metamorphosis, they then cap it off, and for about a week it sits here finishing off its development, and then when the bee is ready, she will work her way out of this cell by biting her way through the top there. They're all girls. If this was drone comb, drones being the boys, the comb is actually a lot bigger, and drones take longer to develop. You see, if you come onto this side of the frame, if you look very carefully at the tip here, I don't know if you can see it, but inside there is a larva. The eggs are tiny. The eggs are about the size of a bit of dust, and so they're very hard to see on a camera. But you can see that there's one in there. And I will look out for another couple of frames that have a lot more larva and pupa. Yeah. If I was a bee, what kind of bee would I be? I don't know. It's a good question. I have to think about the answer to that one. But I'll probably be a bumblebee, which has nothing to do with a honeybee. These guys work so hard, and they have a tough life, and they're suppressed by their queen to do what they're told, and I'm not. But yeah, bumblebees are solitary. So here, if we can just, yep.
So are some people more susceptible than
No, we're all as equally as susceptible to being stung. Now, when I do get stung, sometimes obviously the stinger on the end of the bee sticks in you, and there's a venom sac, and it pumps venom into you. And then there's also, if going back to those pheromones and hormones, the bee will sometimes lay a little bit of smell there that tells the other bees, I'm dangerous, and sting me again. Now, if only the girl bees sting, the boys, the drones don't have stingers because there isn't room in their anatomy for a stinger and their male genitals. Right. I'm fine. So what I'm looking for here is to show you more laying patterns so that the queen, see how the queen is making, laying more babies across these cells. So this beehive has been a little bit of a late bloomer. They've made messy looking combs, see how it's all wavy, which is how it would be in a more natural environment. They've done some capped honey here. These, it's hard probably to tell on the camera, but these are actually larger cells. The shape of the hexagon is bigger, which indicates to me that this has also been drone combed. So this is where the queen in previous times has laid baby boys. We just keep going through the hive a little bit more. Yeah.
would you be willing to facilitate
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so this year has been a very good year from a honey production point of view, and we have pulled thousands of pounds of honey from our various hives. So we have. Let me just see if I can find. Now, one of the common questions that people ask is, "Oh, can we see the queen?" But the queen is well and truly hiding at this stage in these hives, and even though she's bigger than the other bees, she's not that much bigger. It's like the way I describe it to kids is, if you buy a 30-inch TV, it's a big TV. If you buy a 36-inch TV, it's got 40% more screen area, but it doesn't actually look that much bigger. Just gets more fuel for the smoke. So the queen is that much bigger, but she's not like ridiculously large in relation to the other bees. It takes a trained eye to see. Yeah, go for it.
How many beekeepers are part of your collection?
Well, we're not a collective, we're a company. So we are 7 beekeepers who manage about 250 hives. And from what I understand, there's about 2,000 beekeepers in Chicago.
Is this a full-time job for you or kind of a side job?
It's most definitely a side job. It's a socially minded enterprise. I am trying to create jobs in North Lawndale and economic opportunities. So, for example, one of our employees is an Iraqi refugee. He was a professor in Iraq of English and also a beekeeper, and moved here as a 50 or so year old man and had a hard time finding work. And I was very pleased to be able to employ him. So this is in the nursery. So this is from the bottom box. So the box is lowest down in the hive, and you can see there's a lot of capped brood there. And I don't know if you can get in really close, Ruthie, down here. You can actually see some eggs that are a couple of days old. I don't know if you'll be able to see them or not. So this indicates to me that, the bees are looking healthy. They're hairy. Their wings are good. There's some larvae there. You see the white. Iris, could you bring me the bee brush, please? And I can run a demonstration of how we can use the bee brush. And so if this is full, there's about 3,000 eggs per side. And so the colony can really grow in numbers quite quickly. So I'm going to just, this is how you would brush the bees. As you see, very gently move them away. And then you can see those white, they look almost like maggots. See the babies. And then there's, this is dark. This is old comb. We reuse the comb. So if you look in these cells here, you can see the eggs that are a few days old. So they've turned from being tiny, tiny specks. They're about 5 days old, and they're starting to curl and grow. So they're being fed to these. One of the questions earlier was about what are the bees doing at different times. These are nurse bees. They are only here working to serve the babies and to feed them and protect them and stuff. They are not flying out to get food. The hive is relatively empty now because we're in the middle of the day, and all the workers who would be out gathering food are out gathering food.
Wait, if you look here, see these ones are feeding babies.
Well, they're working with the babies. Yes, they're feeding the babies. They're tending to them, and they're probably going, "Why on earth are we outside in the sunshine? What is going on?" So we'll put them back in. But so this, as a beekeeper, I can look at and I can go, my bees are looking healthy. My queen is active, even though I haven't seen her, because I have freshly laid eggs and by quite a lot of volume. And I'm looking for the placement of them, and they're placed exactly in the center of each cell, which shows me that the queen is healthy and laying as she should and properly. So it starts here with making bees from babies, and then goes into, once these guys are proficient and strong, they're out collecting. These babies emerge, and they make home, and then they age, and then they go out and collect nectar, and then other bees are back here processing, drying, and making the honey, and on they go. This process from being laid to birth for a worker bee is 21 days, so the beehive can really get going pretty quickly once it gets established. So if you think that, one second, I'll get to the question. We have 10 frames in each box like this. So if there's 1,500 babies here, that's 1,500 more bees in 3 weeks' time, at least, times 10. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes here, some of which have babies in and some of which have honey. So before you know it, you can have 50 to 100,000 bees in a beehive. Next question.
Is it possible for people to change the job as shown?
Yes, but not like, it doesn't work in the same way as in the bee movie. But they do change jobs as they get older, and also how they, I don't know, and the scientists I've talked to don't know whether they do what they're told to do or they do what they seem to be well skilled to do. And we don't know whether a bee is born knowing it's, for instance, going to be a guard bee, or whether it's trained to become a guard bee.
Okay. How do you elect a new queen, and how long does it sit on the throne?
So the queen doesn't sit on a throne by any means. She's probably the hardest worker in the colony. So all of these cells that you've seen, the hexagonal pieces, I'm just going to put the beehive back together and then carry on answering the questions. So all the cells you've seen have been horizontal, parallel to the ground. In the spring, when a colony is doing well, we will see the emergence of what are called queen cells, and they are vertical cells that the bees make, and the queen lays an egg in there, and then that egg is fed royal jelly, and it becomes a queen. So what happens is, it looks totally different, and if the colony is doing really well, then the bees say, you know what, life is so good around here. We've got food, got a nice place to live, everything's working really well. I'm going to move out, but before I move out, I'm going to make another queen so that she can live here and look after stuff. So they make a queen cell. In fact, they make 6 or 7 or 8 queen cells. They fertilize them. And then a couple of days before the queen's going to emerge, the original queen with all of her loyalists leaves, and that's what's called that's a swarm. They swarm and they go out to find somewhere new to live. Yeah, they'll go into a tree nearby for a day or two, and then some scout bees will go out and find a really great place to live. And then when they're swarming, most people get really scared because there's clouds and clouds of bees, but actually the bees are more interested in trying to find somewhere to live.
Okay.
So a couple more questions.
But then we're going to have to wrap it up. So,
okay.
Does the queen lay in one spot and the eggs are moved, or does she move from spot to spot to lay?
The queen moves from spot to lay. So the eggs are laid into one position, and that's where they stay.
Okay. How often do you collect honey from the hive throughout the summer?
Usually about twice a year, and depending on performance and yield, it'll be in July and in September.
Okay. Last question, how long have you been a beekeeper? Did you get interested in it, and how did you get interested?
So I've always been interested in eating honey. I'm privileged enough through work and everything else to travel the world a little bit, and I always buy local honey. I've always enjoyed local honey. I have very vivid memories of being a little boy and going to visit my grandmother in the south of France and getting local honey. Fast forward to living in Chicago, and a friend of mine who's just returned to Australia, where he comes from. He was keeping bees, and he said to me one day, "Oh, come and have a look at," I said, "Could I come and have a look at the bees?" And he said, "Oh, come down." And I helped him a few times, and then he was like, why don't you do this for yourself? It's pretty easy. Little did I know. And that was about 5 years ago. So we've had bees for about 5 years.
Okay, we have one more question. What were some of the local businesses? What were some of the local businesses that use honey from your company?
Some of the local businesses that use honey from our company are Right Beside Her, Revolution Brewing, CH Distillery, and then a whole bunch of restaurants, predominantly in the West Loop. Pretty Cool Ice Cream have used our honey. Is Was Brewery, brew out of Mars. So a lot in the food, beverage, and alcohol space. And then Little Bad Wolf, I think, Five Rabbits Brewery. We have hives under management at their property, so they pay us to manage those beehives. Some of them keep all the honey and use it. Others, we sell it on their behalf.
That's all the questions.
So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Leonard, for leading the session. It was great. So informational.
My pleasure, anytime. So I'll say Shana Tova, a little early Shana Tova to everyone. Happy, healthy, sweet year. So as we know from what I was saying earlier, both a good year and a sweet year. So hope everyone stays healthy and enjoy local honey. It's rumored to be very, very good for you, for your immune system and for dealing with allergies and other stuff. And then and support local business. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rau children, for helping your dad, and Ruth as well for being the camera woman behind the scenes.
Yep, thanks, everyone. Okay, bye.
We're be popping off.
Should I end reading for y'all?
Stay on.
We stay on.
No. I'm the host. Can I have it? Okay.
Look at that. Oh, goodness.
Amazon.
So you ended up with about 50 people at its max, 50 households watching you today.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't know who was going to pop on, but you had a lot pop on, and definitely had some religious school families.
My mother-in-law is on too. Hello, mother-in-law.
I saw.
Still on.
Good turnout. Yeah. Where is she? Oh.
Yeah, it was a really good turnout. It was really cool, Leonard. It's really interesting to see it and hear it up close like that. To see the bees like that is crazy. Most people don't get.
And what I didn't say, what I meant to say is, throughout the whole process, as you see, I'm not wearing a veil or anything. And did I get stung?
Yes.
No, not a single thing.
I didn't get stung.
And none of us got stung. So people get very scared of being stung, but actually, if you understand how to interact with your animals, then you don't get stung.
It was great. I'm gonna ride to your house in the early afternoon if you guys are around. You're around.
Yeah,
around.
we'll be here.
Right. I want to drop off.
We'll drop off. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.